The Inventor's Secret. What Thomas Edison, The Inventor's Secret. What Thomas Edison Told Henry Ford by Suzanne Slade. Illustrated by Jennifer Black Reinhardt. Not so long ago, the world was a little slower, a little simpler, and a whole lot quieter. No airplanes roaring overhead, no cars rumbling down roads, no phones ringing in pockets. Then things began to change because of two curious boys, Thomas and Henry, and one secret. Young Thomas got into trouble, a lot. It always started with an experiment. He just had to see how things worked. Thomas was curious about chemistry. He mixed up colorful potions in his basement, but explosions shook the house night and day. Thomas was curious about locomotives. He got a job as a newsboy, selling papers on a train, but one of his experiments set the baggage car on fire. Most of all, Thomas was curious about electricity, invisible energy that flowed and stopped, sizzled and popped. He tied wires to his cat's tail and rubbed their fur. Sparks flew that day. Henry was born 16 years after Thomas. He got in a heap of trouble too. He was always doing experiments instead of his chores because he just had to see how things worked. Henry was curious about wind-up toys. He took his sister's toys apart, but couldn't always get them back together. Henry was curious about the rushing river. He built a dam and water wheel to catch its energy, but flooded the neighbor's field instead. Most of all, Henry was curious about engines, machines that chugged and purred, hiccuped and whirred. He built a steam engine from a 10-gallon can, 10 blades, and a pipe, but it exploded and set the school fence on fire. As Thomas grew older, he dreamed of creating his own inventions, electric gadgets to make life easier. He designed an electric pen so people could rest their weary hands. His sharp pen cut a stencil that made copies. In just one day, people could print a pile of copies that would have taken weeks to write by hand. As Henry grew older, he dreamed of creating his own inventions too. Powerful engines to make life easier. When he was 12, he spied something amazing. An engine-powered buggy. He'd never seen a vehicle that wasn't pulled by a horse. Henry sprinted up to the buggy, his mind filled with questions. What powered the engine? How fast did it go? What could it do? The driver boasted the vehicle, ran on coal and steam, and went about 12 miles an hour. Its engine powered farm equipment and huge saws. The mighty machine got Henry's mind spinning. An engine didn't eat or rest like a horse. It could carry people, mail, and news fast. From then on, Henry thought about one thing, making his own vehicle. A car. Hard-working families could afford. Then folks could go to town anytime, not just the weekly Saturday trip. They could visit faraway places they'd only heard of. But Henry couldn't even repair his broken watch. How could he even build a car? They could visit faraway places they'd only heard about. But Henry couldn't even repair his broken watch. How would he even? They could visit faraway places they'd only heard about. But Henry couldn't even repair his broken watch. How would he ever build a car? Then he heard about Thomas's electric pen. What's his secret, Henry wondered. How did he make such a marvelous machine? Later, Thomas created an invention that recorded and played back sounds. When Thomas talked into his new phonograph, Mary had a little lamb, it talked right back. Mary had a little lamb, his phonograph could also play music. Henry was still dreaming about cars. Everywhere he went, his pockets rattled with metal parts. When he was 17, he took a job at a machine shop to learn more about engines and machinery. Then, 2 years later, a farmer hired Henry to operate a new steam engine. Soon, Henry began tinkering on a steam engine of his own. Henry was still dreaming about cars. Everywhere he went, his pockets rattled with metal parts. When he was 17, he took a job at a machine shop to learn more about engines and machinery. Then, 2 years later, a farmer hired Henry to operate a new steam engine. Soon, Henry began tinkering. Soon, Henry began tinkering on a steam engine of his own. He strapped the homemade engine to an old mowing machine. His contraption sputtered along for 40 feet, then collapsed. Henry's design was a flop, but everyone was buzzing about Thomas's talking phonograph. What's his secret? Henry wondered. Meanwhile, Thomas was working on an electric light so people could read past dark. After changing his design many times, he created an incandescent light bulb that burned all night. Henry was determined to make his vehicle work, so he took a job at a company that made engines. One day, he repaired a fancy engine from England. It had a 4-stroke cylinder that burned gas to create power. Fascinated, he built a model of the engine to see how it worked. After that, Henry spent long nights and Saturdays working on his car. Friends and co-workers helped too. When he finally rolled his creation out of his workshop, it had 2 cylinders for double the power, a 3-gallon tank for gas, and 4 bicycle tires for wheels. Henry's quadricycle could go up to 20 miles per hour, but it cost a fortune to make. Most people thought his rattling gas buggy was a joke. "Get a horse," people shouted at Henry, but the whole country was crazy about Thomas's electric light. Henry scratched his head. What's his secret? Still, Henry believed in his dream. Although he knew that other people were working on gas cars, he was determined to make the best. One that was easy to drive, big enough for families, and most important, a car everyone could afford. While Henry was working on his design, Thomas earned patents for over 100 new inventions. Henry couldn't stand it any longer. He had to find out Thomas's secret. So Henry hopped a train in Detroit and chugged 600 miles to New York City. That's where important businessmen, including Thomas, were gathering for a meeting. Henry did some fast talking and got invited to a big dinner with Thomas as the guest of honor. During dinner, everyone kept talking to Thomas. Henry peered down the large table at the famous inventor. He waited and waited and waited. Finally, Henry gathered his courage. He moved right next to Thomas and told him he was building a gas car. Is it a four-cycle engine?" Thomas asked. Henry lit up brighter than any light bulb. He grabbed a menu and started sketching his engine. Thomas fired off question after question. Henry happily answered each one. And that's when it happened. Blue eyes sparkling, Thomas leaned in close to Henry. He banged his fist on the table. "Keep at it," he shouted. Henry smiled. "Keep at it?" Henry laughed. He'd known Thomas's secret all along. Thomas Edison and Henry Ford are 2 of the most important men in American history. Thomas Edison was an American inventor and businessman who is best known for developing the long-lasting light bulb. Many earlier inventors had made attempts to devise a light bulb for widespread use, but their versions failed to last long enough, were too expensive to produce, or use too much electrical current. After several experiments, Edison succeeded in 1879 in creating a bulb that lasted 13.5 hours. This was the first commercial incandescent bulb. Henry Ford was an industrialist who founded the Ford Motor Company. Like Edison, his efforts were not focused on inventing something, but on improving it so that it could be manufactured for the public. Ford developed and manufactured the first automobile that many middle-class Americans could actually afford. Edison and Ford were also good friends who often gave each other business advice and even vacationed together. Edison was the person who gave Ford the confidence to build his own gas-powered car.